In this video, we'll be going over some of the best feats you can take for your fighter. The fighter is the most versatile martial class in the game due to the fact they have proficiency in all forms of equipment, ranging from light to heavy armor, simple and martial weapons, and shields. Additionally, fighters gain access to more feats or ability score increases than any other class in the game. 7 as opposed to the normal 4, barring rogues would get 6 instead. So you have more chances to build up your ideal fighter than you might expect. So starting off this list at number 10, we have Eldritch Adept, introduced in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. This feat allows you to learn one Eldritch invocation from the Warlock class that has no prerequisites. These invocations exist to enhance a Warlock's abilities and customize their Warlock experience. But since the introduction of this feat can now also grant their benefits to other classes, rather than dipping 2 levels into Warlock to grab one. While this might seem like a strange pick to start this list off at first, there's actually a really solid reason for this. While there are some potentially useful and fun options you can choose from, such as Eyes of the Runekeeper, allowing you to read all writing, or Beguiling Influence, granting you proficiency in Deception and Persuasion, there is one invocation that you might see fighters go for the most when taking this feat, and that's Devil's Sight. Devil's Sight grants you the amazing benefit of being able to see normally in both magical and non-magical darkness to a distance of 120 feet. In a way, this grants you a super powered version of dark vision. However, it is important to note that Devil's Sight only works in darkness, not dim light, meaning that this invocation doesn't necessarily serve as a total replacement for dark vision. Funnily enough, this means that if you don't have dark vision and you take Devil's Sight, you're more effective in both bright light and total darkness than you would be if it were dim light, as a dimly lit area counts as being lightly obscured, incurring the penalties of being so, such as disadvantage on perception checks using sight. However, if you're playing one of the many races that gets dark vision by default, then you would have little to no problem with this ever happening, unless you're trying to see beyond your dark vision range, of course. As you may have guessed, being able to correctly ignore all types of non-magical and magical darkness is incredibly useful to a fighter. In fact, it's so useful that many fighters will typically dip 2 Warlock levels just to grab both Devil's Sight and even Agonizing Blast, since Eldritch Blast scales extremely well with it. However, if you're only taking full fighter levels, then you'll have plenty of feats to be able to take Eldritch Adept purely for Devil's Sight, considering how strong it is. As a fighter, you'll always want to eliminate any kind of debilitating effects before they happen. And if your party is traversing a particularly dark dungeon, being able to see normally for 120 feet can go a long way, especially if you're a range-based fighter that's able to take an enemy by surprise, since you would most likely be able to see them better than they might see you. Essentially, what all of this means is if you're running a character with both dark vision and Devil's Sight, the only way to affect your vision is by effectively blinding your character through the use of the effects that heavily obscure or outright blinds you. But even then, you can just take the blind fighting style, also introduced in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, to grant yourself 10 feet of blind sight, which isn't much, but can really help a melee-based fighter get through tough spots when they really need to. But while Devil's Sight is definitely a strong contender for this list, it only takes the number 10 spot because it's not really essential to take and works more as a safety net rather than a feat that might completely change how you approach most encounters. Of course, if your campaign relies heavily on darkness, whether it be magical or non-magical, then Devil's Sight is an absolute game changer. And at number 9, we have Fighting Initiate, introduced in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. All this feat does is grant you an additional fighting style that you can switch out every time you reach a level that grants an ability score increase if you want to. The only caveat of this feat is that you can't take the same fighting style more than once. So if you have the archery fighting style when taking this feat, you can't take archery again. While this might not be a very powerful feat, it does come with the benefit of allowing your fighter to be good at more things, especially if you're playing a fighter that likes to switch things up every now and then. Maybe you took archery to be more ranger focused, but also want to dual wield rapiers, so you take Fighting Initiate to give yourself 2-weapon fighting, so that you can add your ability modifier to your offhand weapon attacks as well. Or maybe you want to make the most of sword and boarding by taking the dual fighting style, giving yourself +2 to your damage rolls using one-handed weapons, and protection to give yourself a reaction that you can use whenever someone within 5 feet of you, other than yourself, is subjected to an attack and allowing you to impose disadvantage on said attack. Or maybe you just want to pick up something a bit generic, such as defense to grant yourself a flat +1 AC, while wearing any kind of armor. Whatever your reasoning is, Fighting Initiate is a great way to double up on fighting styles and further customize how much you want your fighter to play out as a versatile martial class without breaking the game in half, which is why this feat only takes number 9 on this list. And at number 8, we have Tough from the Player's Handbook. Tough is a feat that makes you beefier and hard to kill by increasing the maximum amount of hit points by a flat amount equal to twice your level. And then every level you gain after, you gain an additional 2 extra hit points, making this feat grant you its full benefit regardless of when you decide to take it. In short, at first level, you would have an extra 2 hit points to your total number of hit points, and 40 extra hit points once you reach 20th level. Tough is one of those feats that provides a generic enough benefit to be taken by anyone and everyone. A spellcaster can take Tough to help bolster up their already low number of hit points to be on par with the party's rogue, for instance. A barbarian, however, might take Tough to bolster their already insane high number of hit points just to make themselves almost impossible to kill, given their innate resistance while raging. Fighters are somewhere in the middle. While they can be kind of tanky with their D10 hit die, they don't really get much in the way of resistance to damage types like a barbarian would. And a fighter would need to have good armor and shield to be able to AC tank decently well. As such, Tough isn't as useful on a fighter as it would be for other classes, but you do still gain the benefits of being harder to take down, which is why Tough makes it on this list in the first place. Generically, Tough works great on any kind of fighter, but melee-based fighters would probably make much more effective use out of this feat since they prefer being on the front lines rather than treating it as a get-out-of-jail-free card on their off chance that they might take a meaty hit from distance like range-based fighters might. However, if you do decide to build your fighter more towards tankiness, then Tough is still pretty good to take, and scales up really well as you gain +3 armor, and maybe even a +3 shield, that your hit points would be high enough to make up for any attacks that happen to pierce through your supremely high AC. This holds especially true for fighters, since one more turn being alive effectively means 3 or 4 more attacks your fighter can dish out, potentially turning the tide in your favor. Overall, Tough is definitely a good feat for fighters to take, as a general option that doesn't really have a huge enough impact to be considered the best. There are plenty of other feats you can take that complement fighters in a much better and meaningful way, as you'll soon find out. And entering at number 7 on this list, we have Resilient from the PHB. This feat has the very simple effect of letting you increase any one ability score of your choosing by 1 to a maximum of 20. And gain proficiency with saving throws of that chosen ability. This is an excellent feat that works well with fighters because of their Indomitable feature that they first learn at 9th level. Indomitable basically allows you to reroll a failed saving throw using the new roll once per long rest, but accumulate more uses of it as you level up to a maximum of 3 at 17th level. As a result, Resilient is one of those features that really complements and enhances one of the fighter's core class features by granting them better chances to pass certain types of saving throws. While fighters are already proficient in strength and constitution saving throws, Resilient allows you to be able to round out the rest of your physical prowess by allowing you to have proficiency in dexterity saving throws as well. Or you might allow yourself to be better at mental saving throws such as intelligence or wisdom. Samurai fighters gain proficiency in wisdom saving throws via the elegant courtier feature at 7th level. So adding Resilient to yourself to make you proficient in a total of 4 saving throws effectively makes you a master of dodging spells and other effects, especially with Indomitable providing an extra chance to succeed if you do fail. As for why Resilient takes a higher spot on this list than something like Tough, there are 2 reasons. The first is already discussed. It combos really nicely with Indomitable. The second reason is because saving throws become the much deadlier threat than attack rolls as the game progresses. So being able to take half damage more consistently from spells or negate the secondary effects of other dangerous abilities, such as being charmed, frightened, etc., is much more important than outright taking hits from your opponent. At the end of the day, however, you do still have more than enough fighter levels to take both Tough and Resilient, which should be a good enough compromise for Resilient just being slightly higher. And at number 6, we have the Healer feat from the PHB. This feat grants you 2 fairly useful benefits. The first allows you to restore 1 hit point to a dying creature you stabilize using a healer's kit. As for the second benefit, you can spend an action in order to spend 1 out of the 10 uses of your healer's kit in order to restore 1d6 plus 4 hit points to that creature, plus an additional amount of hit points equal to that creature's maximum number of hit die. However, once you heal someone like this, they can't regain hit points from the feat again until they finish a short or long rest. This feat provides a very strong amount of emergency healing, whether you might need to pick up a downed ally, or keep an ally going longer by providing them with a once per short or long rest burst of healing if your healer is preoccupied or you don't have one to begin with. While healer isn't meant to be a total replacement for a healer, it does provide a supplemental amount of healing that can help take the pressure off your healer if an encounter is proving too much to handle. But what makes healer even better on fighters and other classes is the fact that you can still have your cake and eat it too by dealing damage to something, action surging, and then using your action to heal someone who might need that bit of extra healing. This works especially well with range-based fighters who can just shoot their bow and move around the battlefield with little to no risk at all, compared to melee-based fighters that are almost always going to be close enough to enemies, unless they're using a reach weapon to maintain a safe distance to want to risk moving out of an enemy's range. Fortunately, even if this were the case, a fighter can easily stack the healing they get with the healer feat on top of their bonus action feature, Second Wind. Second Wind provides a fighter with a healing amount equal to 1d10 plus their fighter level. Couple this with using the action heal from the healer feat. This means that an 11th level fighter can heal 1d6 plus 15 from healer and 1d10 plus 11 from Second Wind for a total of 1d10 plus 1d6 plus 26 healing all in a single turn. And then you can just action surge to maintain your momentum for combat. And since these all reset when finishing a long rest, this makes healer feat a very nice feat to have complement the rest of your kit, which is why it takes number 6. And at number 5, we have a two-way tie between Sharpshooter and Great Weapon Master, both from the PHB. While these two feats differ from one another in some way, they both come with this same draw that urges players to take them, which is to deal more damage. Both of these feats allow you to, before making an attack with a ranged or melee weapon attack with a heavy property in which you are proficient with, you take a -5 penalty to your attack roll in exchange for a flat plus 10 damage on hit. In this regard, either feat works extremely well for fighters that are using either heavy two-handed weapons or attacking from range with their longbow, because more damage per hit is always good to have. While the downside of losing -5 to your attack roll does make you less accurate, the increase in damage is technically supposed to make up for the amount of times you miss. But as you level up and obtain more magic items and increase your overall accuracy, the accuracy penalty starts to matter less and less. So it's sometimes better to take this feat when you're a little higher level. As for the other benefits, Sharpshooter allows you to ignore the long range penalty of imposing disadvantage on your attack rolls, which essentially means that a longbow's normal range of 150 feet and longer range of 600 feet basically becomes normal 600 feet, allowing you to snipe a creature from several maps away. And if that weren't enough, you also gain the benefit of ignoring half and 3/4 cover, so no AC or dexterity bonuses for creatures trying to take cover that isn't total cover. Meanwhile, Great Weapon Master only has one other benefit, as opposed to the 2 from Sharpshooter, but is a good one whenever you have the chance to use it. This benefit allows you to, once per turn, whenever you land a critical hit or reduce the creature's hit points to 0 with a melee weapon, you can make one melee attack as a bonus action. It's worth noting that this benefit doesn't require you to wield a heavy weapon in order to proc its effect, making Great Weapon Master a bit more generically useful than Sharpshooter. However, again, the main draw of these two feats is the benefit in dealing a lot more damage than what is normally possible. A max level fighter gets a total of 4 attacks per action, which equals to an extra 80 damage if they use Action Surge, or 90 damage if you use Action Surge and proc Great Weapon Master's bonus action attack, which is a massive increase in damage, assuming every attack lands, that is. Speaking of making sure your attacks land, Sharpshooter is arguably better to choose between the two if you're debating taking your fighter one way or the other in terms of playstyle, as you have access to the archery fighting style at first level, which essentially turns the -5 penalty to a -3 if you want to look at it that way. There are other ways to ensure that your attacks using this feat will land, but do require you to be certain subclasses to make happen. Samurai fighters, for example, learn Fighting Spirit at 3rd level, allowing them to, 3 times per long rest, spend a bonus action to temporarily gain hit points that increase with specific levels, but more importantly, allows them to give themselves advantage on all weapon attack rolls they make until the end of their current turn. Having advantage on all your attack rolls not only mitigates the accuracy penalty of these two feats, it also gives you a higher chance to land critical hits, which is just more damage on the board. Battlemaster fighters can also use precision attack to help mitigate the accuracy penalty by spending one of their resources called superiority die, and adding that roll to the attack roll. To briefly explain, these superiority dice start out at D8s and eventually upgrade to D10s and D12s over time, as well as a number of uses, which start out at 4 and upgrade to 6. At the end of the day, however, these feats only take the number 5 spot in this list because, while definitely one of the better options for fighters simply due to the number of attacks they can have per turn, there are definitely other options worth considering, especially if you're playing a subclass that just can't increase its own accuracy. There's also the fact that if you take either of these feats too early, there's a good chance it just becomes a dead feat simply because you have such low odds of hitting a creature that you're better off just making normal strikes most of the time anyway. And at number 4, we have Squire of Solamnia, which was introduced in Dragonlance's Shadow of the Dragon Queen Adventure module. This feat has the prerequisite of being a fighter, a paladin, or building a character with the Knight of Solamnia background, which technically requires you to also be playing the Dragonlance campaign. But this prerequisite can be waived away by the DM if they so choose. Squire of Solamnia grants you 2 benefits, one of which is a bit more powerful than the other. The weaker and more situational benefit of this feature is the ability to mount or dismount a creature using only 5 feet of your movement speed, rather than spending half of your total movement, which can be useful for the Cavalier Fighter, which specializes more in mounted combat than any other class in the game. As for the second and more potent feature of Squire of Solamnia, you can grant yourself advantage on 1 weapon attack roll you make against a creature, but only once per turn. When you land a hit while using this feature, you deal an additional 1d8 damage to the damage roll of your attack. You can do this a number of times per long rest equal to your proficiency bonus, but comes with the added benefit of using these charges only being spent if you actually hit your target. This feat is great on fighters, for what should be an obvious reason. Like a great weapon master and sharpshooter, dealing an extra 1d8 damage on attack is pretty good, even if it's not as much as the aforementioned feats. While this does only apply to 1 attack roll per turn, being able to increase your critical hit damage or negate a disadvantage roll you might have is always a powerful effect to have during combat, as missing a crucial attack can mean the difference between life and death at times. And since charges are only expended when you hit, there's almost never any reason not to use it when you think you need to land a shot against your target. Squire Solamnia is also a great way to proc Elven Accuracy, a feat which requires you to be played in Elven race and allows you to reroll one of your dice that you already had advantage on, effectively giving you double advantage on attack rolls that you make using Dexterity, Intelligence, Wisdom, or Charisma. This can work especially well with champion fighters, since they already have a higher chance to land critical hits with their improved critical feature at 3rd level, increasing the critical hit range. So you only need to roll a nat 19 to 20, rather than need to land only a nat 20 on the d20 roll. In short, Squire Solamnia basically gives you control over when you attack something with advantage, and can be used in conjunction with other feats or abilities, depending on how you build your fighter. That being said, because you can only activate Squire Solamnia once per turn on a single attack roll, this doesn't really have as much of an impact given how many attacks a fighter can eventually make in one turn, which is why this feat doesn't take a higher spot on this list. And at number 3, we have the mobile feat from the PHB. This feat is generally considered one of the best feats in the game, and for fighters, this is no exception. It grants a flat +10 to your movement speed, difficult terrain doesn't cost you extra movement on a turn you use the dash action, and you no longer provoke opportunity attacks from a creature you attack for the rest of the turn, even if you miss. Having +10 movement is good on any class, especially martials, since it allows them to close gaps quicker or reposition much more easily. And being able to not provoke opportunities from creatures you attack can make for some interesting situations. For example, an 11th level fighter can make 3 attacks on a turn, meaning they can walk up to a creature, attack it, walk up to another creature, attack it, and so on and so forth, without worrying of taking opportunity attacks. More realistically, however, you might use your turn to attack up to 3 creatures that are currently surrounding you, so that you can use your 40 feet of walking speed to safely reposition or regroup with your other party members. And if you ever find yourself in the middle of a spike growth or any other form of difficult terrain, using the dash action to ignore that difficult terrain is certainly an option and a way to get out of those areas much sooner, albeit at the cost of a little bit more damage that turn in the case of spike growth, depending on how deep you're in it. What makes mobile such a strong feat for fighters is typically what makes it strong for everyone. It's just a very good generic feat with no real downsides. However, fighters can make use of this feat a little bit more simply due to the fact that they can attack so many times, and because Action Surge lets them use the dash action to get out of difficult terrain while still being able to make attack rolls all on the same turn, which is why mobile takes the number 3 spot on this list. And at number 2, we have Fey Touched. This is a feat which was introduced in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything and comes with 2 benefits. The first benefit is simply an increase to one of your mental scores, by +1 to a maximum of 20. The second benefit of this feat grants you a free, once per long rest, Misty Step that you can cast without using a spell slot. You also learn one first level spell of your choosing that comes from the Divination or Enchantment schools of magic that you can also cast for free once per long rest. Additionally, if you're an Eldritch Knight, the only fighter subclass that has access to spell slots, you can also cast these spells using your own spell slots if you have them. Having access to Misty Step is amazing for a lot of martial-based classes, since it's just a free bonus action teleport with a 30-foot range, which can be used as a fantastic repositioning tool, or even just as a way to get to hard-to-reach places, such as past a locked gate. Meanwhile, in terms of your choices of first-level spells, you have a lot of good options here. While spells such as Bane and Dissonant Whispers might sound tempting, it's important to know that the spell save DCs of the spells are based on whatever stat you used to increase when taking this feat, which will never be as high as any of your main stats, meaning that enemies can very easily beat this DC with fairly decent rolls. So instead, you'd want to opt for spells that don't require any sort of saving throw or attack roll, which are both powerful and plentiful for this feat. Bless is a concentration spell which allows you to select 3 creatures of your choice and bless all of their attack rolls and saving throws with a bonus of 1d4 for 1 minute. Hex and Hunter's Mark are both excellent choices for fighters, since both allow you to add an extra 1d6 damage to every attack roll you make for up to 1 hour. And you can use a bonus action to reapply it if the initial target is dead, without expending a new spell slot, so long as you're still concentrating on the spell. Hex also allows you to select one stat and bestow disadvantage on all checks that creature makes. So if you choose their strength stat, they would have disadvantage against being grappled if they choose to contest with their athletics rather than their acrobatics. Meanwhile, Hunter's Mark allows you to track a creature down more easily by granting you advantage on perception or survival checks when finding a creature marked by the spell. While probably not as important, there is a distinction in how Hex and Hunter's Mark deal their extra damage. Hex deals an extra 1d6 necrotic damage and can work with any attack roll, including spell attack rolls. Meanwhile, Hunter's Mark adds 1d6 damage of the weapon's type that you use, meaning that Hunter's Mark only works with the weapon attacks. Another option you have is the infamous Silvery Barbs, which lets you use a reaction in response to a creature within 60 feet of yourself succeeding on an attack roll, an ability check, or saving throw to re-roll that successful roll and use the lower result. Additionally, you select a creature within the same range to grant disadvantage on their next attack roll, ability check, or saving throw for the next minute, or until the benefit is used. Silvery Barbs is infamous for being a first level spell with extremely high influence on how a game is played, as manipulating dice rolls is arguably not something a first level spell should be able to do to the extent that it does. There are other spells you might reasonably want, but that would mostly be up to the player's tastes and what they wish to aim for. All in all, Fey Touched is an excellent way to give your fighters some extra utility and mobility that they wouldn't have otherwise, which is why this feat takes number 2 spot on this list. And at number 1, we have Gift of the Chromatic Dragon from Fizban's Treasury of Dragons. This feat grants you 2 abilities which provide unique benefits. The first is the ability to use Chromatic Infusion in order to, as a bonus action once per long rest, infuse a simple or martial weapon with your choice of acid, cold, fire, lightning, or poison, causing that damage to deal an extra 1d4 of the chosen damage type every time you hit with that infused weapon for 1 minute. This works kind of like Hex, but in reverse, applying to a weapon instead of a creature, meaning you can attack different creatures while retaining the bonus damage, and doesn't require concentration to maintain. Of course, only having a 1 minute duration does mean you have to be a bit selective when using the ability. The second benefit of this feat grants you a more defensive style option in the form of reactive resistance, allowing you to resist 1 instance of acid, cold, fire, lightning, or poison damage you take as a reaction that you can do a number of times equal to your proficiency bonus per long rest. This ability gives you a little bit more survivability, as you don't normally resist any type of damage unless you take magic items into account or other damage resisting options like multi-classing into Barbarian, certain damage resisting potions, etc, etc. So resisting even 1 attack can be very impactful, especially since you get so many of these to use per long rest. However, the golden goose of this feat is definitely Chromatic Infusion, as dealing an extra 1d4 per attack is insanely good on fighters, more so than any other class. An 11th level fighter can make 3 attacks, which results in an extra 3d4 damage using this feat. And if the fighter chooses to action surge, then that goes up to 64 in a single turn. On its own, Gift of the Chromatic Dragon is such a huge spike in power level for a fighter that it just has to take #1 spot on this list on that alone. However, there are plenty of other ways to make use of this feat. Since you have so many chances to take feats as a fighter, it's not unrealistic to combo this feat with something like Fey Touched, taking Hex or Hunter's Mark for the extra d6 bonus damage on all your attacks. This means that as an 11 level fighter with 20 strength using a greatsword, you can effectively deal 18d6 plus 64 plus 30 damage, which averages out to a total of 108 total damage, assuming you spend the first turn setting up either Hex or Hunter's Mark or Chromatic Infusion, and the second turn applying the other bonus action, and just holding off on your action surge until both are good to go. And if you manage to hit with Great Weapon Master on top of that, that's just an extra 60 damage on top of it all, assuming you're lucky enough to hit them all, of course. Overall, the amount of extra damage this can help you push out over the course of a single large combat is enormous, due to the number of attacks you can make, and is a lot safer to use than Great Weapon Master, since you're not sacrificing any accuracy for it. And since this feat technically scales as you level up, due to having more attacks as you gain more levels, Gift of the Chromatic Dragon is an excellent feat to take early on or as a late game option, further cementing its spot on this list.